So I want to thank you for joining our community today and in this important discussion as we all work together to increase employment equity through educational and economic opportunity. So welcome, Natasha Robinson.
Hello, everyone. If I had a sound emoji that would follow me, it would be pew, 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 that type of sound. Because every once in a while, you have to believe in yourself and be like, man, that is somebody. And that somebody is me. So if you ever need to reinforce the intellectual prowess that is you, read your own accomplishments out loud. And remind yourselves that you are necessary and you are worthy, independent of and because of what you have accomplished. So thank you all so very much for having me, especially to Kaisha and Melissa. I am very appreciative of being here. Okay, I'm going to start my clock on my phone because by way of disclosure, I am a mother, I should say a daughter of a preacher and a musician. So sometimes the riff is there. And so I want to make sure that I am in a Chronos time and that I am timing myself appropriately because we all have things to do. All right. I'm glad that you all are all in the chat. I monitor the chat as well as I'm talking. So if you have not already, there was a question that said, put your greeting and where you're from in the chat. So if you could do that as well, I'm going to share my screen so that we are ready to get started. All right. So I am a person that believes in the call and response. So if you can see this screen, I want you to put a thumbs up, or you can give me a thumbs up emoji. Let me know that you're all right. The other thing is, if this is your lunchtime, or if you have not eaten, please take some time and eat, okay? Unconsciousness is not a good look for a presentation. And I want to make sure that you are not only filled with information, but you also filled with the sustenance that is good food and good drink, all right? So we're going to go ahead and get started. Our conversation today, because it's not really a presentation, it's more of a conversation. It's an inside job. Conversations about DEI at the intersection of our heads and our hearts. If you all remember back in 2020, after the murder of George Floyd, if you were paying attention, there was this outburst, this exponential creation of DEI policies, programs, procedures. And there was this reckoning where all types of institutions, financial institutions, religious institutions, educational institutions, were trying to figure out, where do we go from here? How do we make sure that we do not engage in the institutional lynching of those that we say we serve, of those that we say we're in allegiance to, okay? So it may have been George Floyd killed at an intersection in the daytime in public, but what about us and our policies and procedures may take the life out of those that we serve, okay? So in 2020, it was all about that. Well, this morning when I was in the kitchen cooking my fire omelet, I wish you were there because it was delicious. While I was cooking, there was something that came to me, and what came to me made me bowl over in laughter. And one of the things that came to me was that sometimes some of us, not any of you, but some people that we know wanted to put DEI on everything. Everything was created for the purpose of saying, like a grocery list, okay, I got the sugar, I got the butter, I got the DEI. And so it reminded me of this commercial, where this commercial is promoting or marketing hot sauce. Okay, stay with me, I'm going somewhere. It's promoting hot sauce. And at the end, their tagline is, I put this blank on everything. Have y'all ever heard of that conversation, of that commercial? And so what it's saying is, this hot sauce is so good that you put it on everything. You put it on ice cream, you put it on omelets, you put it on salads, you put on whatever. And so I just happen to have my bottle here so I can show you all that sometimes DEI is people saying, I put this on everything. I put DEI on everything. I put it on how we do our agendas, how we greet our students, how we greet our coworkers and our administrators. And sometimes just because you put DEI on something does not mean that it's really DEI. Okay, so I want to engage in the conversation about how we move from aesthetic allegiance, which is just claiming DEI, to actually engage it in our lives. Putting DEI on something is no more allyship than me walking into a garage makes me a car. Okay, there's a process to it. There's a learning and there is an unlearning. And so these are the things that I'm going to talk about with you today. Now, I told you that use the chat because the chat is where it's at. So if there's something that you want to say, what you want to share, what you want to challenge, holla at me, let me know, okay? Because I can take it. As Kaisha said, I have been an assistant public defender. So I have represented persons who have been charged with all types of crimes. So an insult is not gonna hurt my feelings, all right? We're going to move on to the next slide. Here we go. So I want you to put in the chat, you were starting to introduce yourselves, but I want to know who you are. Okay, that means I am blank and I show up in the world as blank. Okay, that's what I want you to fill out. I'm gonna stop sharing it, but I want the introductions in the chat. I am blank and I show up in the world as blank. So I am Natasha and I show up in the world as a free Black woman. Okay, that's my truth. All right, I'm going to stop sharing. And the reason why I'm going to stop sharing is one, I'm going to put this in the chat so that you have the prompt because I am still a professor. I am blank and I show up in the world as. Now, there is no wrong answer. You cannot mess this up. Okay. And so while I have stopped sharing is because anytime I am teaching, anytime I am presenting, I take the concept of community, which is, I do not live with you all, I do not work with you all, but when we come into space, I see you, I acknowledge you. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a moment and do what I do for every class, which is I am going to greet everyone. Now, if I Biddy ha ha your name, if I chop your name up, I want you to stop me and say, excuse me, my name is pronounced this way. Okay. And why would I do this? Why would I stop my time and call your name out? I'm glad you asked me. The reason is that if we are to engage in equity work, we have to engage in humanity work. Okay, which means acknowledging the totality of the person that we see. We are more than administrators. We are more than professors. We are more than deans. We are people. And so acknowledging that, saying persons' names, if that's what you feel comfortable doing, acknowledging the humanity of the people, what that does is that's just establishing community relations, one name at a time, one decision at a time. And so we don't want the recognition of you only to be enshrouded in guilt and shame, which is when someone is saying what you're not doing, how you need to improve. Well, these are the feedback. This is the evaluations. Y'all know what I'm talking about. If you don't want to, say amen, you just blink because I know I'm in the right house. Okay. So these are the things that I do. I'm going to be demonstrating while I'm presenting how to create those communities. Okay. All right. Let me go back to sharing my slide. Okay. So we've done that. I am person and I show up in the world as this. I promise you, when you do this in meetings and presentations with students, parents, what have you, that is going to change the tenor and the temperament of how people show up because you're acknowledging them first. Okay, let's go to the next slide. Okay, so another thing, community covenants. Now, I don't have the time to do it here, but what I also suggest is that when we are having these meetings and these conversations, they are not rules, they are covenants, because covenants connect people to people. Okay, and some of the agreements may be, for instance, today, the stories leave the lesson, I'm sorry, the stories stay, the lessons leave, which means whatever is shared personally, take the lessons out of this situation, but leave the stories, because it's not easy for people to share what they're going through or how they are feeling or what they're thinking. Honor them and their humanity by keeping it confidential. All right. This is the meat of our session, 5 elements to success. These are the 5 elements that have been listed on the ACE Up website, and I am focusing on green and blue, advancing institutionalized equity and aligning policy and practices. And so these are the descriptors. In case you've forgotten, I'm here to remind you, consider me Attorney Robinson, Exhibit A. Advancing institutionalized equity, which is what it says it is. Okay, I'm not going to read it because you can see it and you have the beautiful website. And then aligning policies and practices. Now, I'm going to be taking a different route in having a discussion about DEI. Okay, I almost said DUI, but that's a criminal lawyer in me. DEI, okay, which is diversity, equity, inclusion. It's going to be a little different kind of conversation. And I want you to at least hear and consider it. And then if it works for you, that's wonderful. If it does not, as my grandmom used to say, chew the fish and spit out the bones. Take what you need and reject what you don't. All right. So by the end of today's session, it's not gonna, we will be this. We will be increasing our ability, capability, and willingness to do the following, because this type of work takes time. You're not going to come away from a 45-minute, 1 hour, 2 hour conversation and just come down from the mountain like Charlton Heston in 10 Commandments, where now you just got everything. No, it's going to take some time. But by today, we're going to have a conversation that allows us to assess our current mindset and heart set, that allows us to assemble the ingredients we need to create and curate our mindset and heart set, and then align our heart set and mindset by understanding that all of our successes are intertwined, okay? We don't succeed in silos. We succeed in community, okay? If you want something to tweet, there that is, because that was good, okay? We do not have successes in silos. We succeed in community. So I appreciate the difficulty that some of us may have had, because sometimes it's a disconnect to be able to talk about what we do and who we are. And so part of equity is me advocating for the point of we no longer have to bring our redacted selves to what it is that we do. Now, that does not mean tell all your business. What that means is that in however way you show up, you are not saying that I am just white, or I am just queer, or I am just an academic, or I am just an administrator. Bring your whole selves, because what that does is that then encourages those with whom you work to do the same. Okay? All right. So keep that in your tool pocket. You may want to use that. You may not want to use it. Like I said, it works for me because it works for me. But trust me, if it does not work for you, I got something else for you. All right. So we're going to move on. Thank you, Taylor, for helping me with that. You are reflecting. I want you to think about, in the future, the answers to your questions. Okay. If you want to share those answers in the chat, you absolutely can. But I want you to hold on to those answers, because I want you to revisit them in September, where everything is new and fresh and people are excited. Okay. And then I want you to revisit again, which right about now, end of April, beginning of May, you sick of everybody. Okay, not because you're a mean person. You just like, look, don't say nothing else to me. Don't ask me to meet a deadline. Don't ask me to do a report. Don't ask me to break out in groups. Okay, these are things I want you to continually reflect on, because as you are doing that metacognition, you will realize that some answers may remain the same and some may change. All right, so when I was talking about bringing the totality of who you are, there are some terms that I use in this work. One is called intersectionality. That is one of the words that has been co-opted in the work of DEI. This is where it comes from, where people will say at the intersection of this and at the intersection of that. This is a term that comes from a law professor and civil rights advocate. Her name is Kimberly Crenshaw. And she uses the term intersectionality to talk about the fact that when you're talking about complex structures of inequality, you cannot just redact it to just race or culture or socioeconomic backgrounds or gender or class. It's understanding that people are complex beings. And so when they are thinking about how to approach life, and there are different obstacles, that those obstacles may be multi-tiered. And so intersectionality is saying, what do I do when I am facing the complexity of a person, where I am acknowledging the totality of who they are, rather than the redaction of what interlocking systems of oppression can cause. Now, the term interlocking systems of oppression comes from the Combahee Collective, which is where they're saying, as a Black queer feminist group, they were saying there are different ways in which oppression can show up, but it's not just one at a time. It's interlocking. So you can be facing oppression in education, in finances, in technology, in medicine, in housing, okay? Different ways in which you can face the type of oppression based upon the intersectionality of who you are. So how this applies to DEI is recognizing that persons are not monoliths. We do not all have the same experience. We bring different experiences, different expertise to the table, and it's about recognizing that and trying to flatten these hierarchies, where instead of us going from top to bottom or bottom to top, we are going from left to right. We are going across. We're reaching across to figure out whether you have a JD, PhD, EDD, or as my pastor say, no D. How do you enter the conversation? How do you make sure that you are acknowledging and recognizing your accomplishments, while at the same time not using that to weaponize people who may learn differently, who may have different experiences, who may have different things to bring to the table? So when we are talking about it from administrative standpoints, we're thinking about who are our communities? How do they show up in the world? When we're talking about intersectionality, we're talking about personality, age, nationality, gender expression, mental health, race, language. I would also add first generation, either workers, first generation students, sexual orientation, occupation, religion, class, all other things, because no matter what your role is, you first are addressing the person. And with the person comes their lived experience. So it's that lived experience that you lean into when you are trying to figure out what are the best ways to close equity gaps? What are the best ways in which we are to empower the persons that we work with, the persons that we are invested in, so that they can succeed? And what language can we use? What policies can we put in place to engage and encourage that type of growth? So it's not hierarchical, because that's oppression. Now, I'm not saying that you do not get promoted in particular ways, but what I am saying is that flattening that and recognizing that we work in communities, there is no hierarchy in community, okay? There is rather a shared communal ethic, okay? Now, this is gonna be a little different because of the fact I do not presume that everyone has a lived experience in faith or sacred spaces, but I'm going somewhere. So I just want you to hold on like that. Don't log out and don't fuss me out just yet. Just let me prove my point. All right. So there is a person by the name of Dr. William Augustus Jones. He wrote a book that is called God in the Ghetto. And in that book, he articulates the following. he articulates that how I see God, and I put God in quotes, so stay with me. How I see God determines how I see humans, and then that determines how I order my society of humans. So my theology determines my anthropology, determines my sociology. Okay? Now, I know that could be off-putting for some because like, look, this ain't no church service. I'm not saying that it is. But what I am saying is for the purposes of this discussion, I am expanding the definition of God to represent a school of thought, a pedagogy, policies, beliefs, canons, procedures, anything that a person is allegiant to, reveres, or endears. Okay? You with me so far? Thumbs up emojis. If you're just here, I'm not asking if you agree. I'm just asking if you're still here. Okay? So what I am saying is that whatever a person believes in or is allegiant to, then that then determines how they see the people with whom they are in contact. And then that determines how they order that person, how they give preference to that person. Okay? So look at it this way. At the bottom of this triangle, what and whom do I revere? So these are now questions we ask in the roles that we have. What do I hold sacred as an administrator? What do I believe about DEI? What do I believe about the students or the faculty or the workers that I work with? And then from there, how does my reverence of what I hold dear, how does that become the lens by which I view other people? And then the last question is, how do I rank what and whom I see? So you're starting from the bottom, not because you're here, because that's Drake, but you're starting from the bottom of the triangle and you are moving up. Okay? So for instance, I can tell what someone reveres and hold dear by looking at their policies, their procedures, and their syllabus. I can look immediately. And I'll give you an example. If I have, for example, a faculty or administrator who is a faculty or an administrator who does DEI work, I can tell by what they revere by how they position things in their information. If it is not about the inclusion of all people, if it is saying I am teaching a global classroom or engaging in global partnerships, but everything that I cite, everything that I mention is a heterosexual white male reflection or perspective, then that bumps up against what you say you are, because what you believe shows up in your work. Okay? What you believe shows up in your work. Going back to being aesthetic allegiance. Aesthetic allegiance is saying with your mouth that I support diversity, equity, and inclusion. But if there is no alignment between what you say and what you believe, then what happens is that you are unable to do the soul rewarding work of what it is you choose to do because there is no alignment. Okay, there's a displacement. And so when we are talking about centering those who have been marginalized and those who have been overlooked, in order to do the effective work with them, you have to revere them. You don't have to worship them, but you are going to have to at least say that these persons are worthy for no other reason than because they're worthy, because they're created, because they are engaged in the process of humanity. If you revere anything that is oppressive, limiting, racist, anti-Black, anti-person of color, anything like that, then the work of DUI is aesthetic. This is why we're focusing on your minds and your hearts, okay? It's just a little assessment to see, what do you hold dear? What do you do? Do you hold rest dear? Or do you want to keep pumping through and be a producer? Because then if you revere productivity, guess what? You're going to expect productivity out of everybody else. But if you do not believe that rest is a sacred and divine right, that it is a right that you don't have to earn, then what happens is that it fuels itself through your work and your witness. Okay? So when we're taking an inventory of our heart and our mind, to what and to whom are we allegiant in our pedagogy? Now, I know some may say, well, this is administrators or this is a workforce. Why are you talking about pedagogy? That's more faculty. Here's my point. The fact that I am talking about faculty to administrators or workplace to administrator means we have to stop redacting certain conversations. There needs to be an integration, in my opinion, where the administrators are learning about what the faculty is going through, what the students are going through, what the employers are looking for, and what the employees need to be prepared for. In short, these conversations, it just in silos where we're only going to talk about this in this particular group. We're only going to talk about this in this particular group. Those are old models that I subscribe or I believe are not working. Some of the language that we use about, and this is just me, y'all can kick me out, I don't ever have to come back, but this is me. Leveling the playing field, ladders of success, all those type of things, either they worked then, but they don't work now, or they have never worked, in my opinion. Because when we use certain language, whether we are being innocuous and unintentional, or whether we are being intentional, sometimes, and I'm including myself, we use language of oppression when trying to engage in conversations of DEI. Okay, so some of the things we need to talk about, for example, re-entry. When we're talking about those workers and those students who have had felony convictions, and we call them what? Ex-felons, ex-offenders, ex-whatever. Okay, no, they are people first. People who have blah, 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 blah. Just in language. Sometimes we can just disengage with people through our language. And so it's just something to consider, okay? Our policies, our institutional practices, understand that institutions were not born overnight. So the deconstruction, consideration, and reconstruction is not going to happen overnight, okay? Sometimes we have, when you talk about the implicit bias and all that type of stuff, sometimes we may have hierarchies in our feelings and our thinkings. We may think, okay, well, unless this person has this, and this on their CV, on their resume, I ain't trying to hear nothing they trying to say, okay? What I am proposing to you is that education is in all forms. Education in the classroom, outside the classroom. Sometimes some of the best lessons don't occur in a classroom or on the job, okay? So how does our heart set and our mindset show up in our language, our content, our policies, our procedures, our acknowledgement of real world events? So even though we show up to these spaces and places as administrators or in the workforce, understand that does not mean that real world stuff is not happening. It's about the acknowledgement of that, because sometimes what happens in the real world can then come into the soul and spirit of the person or you, and that may serve as a barrier to the equity that you are seeking to implement. So it is just an acknowledgement of the totality of different things. Now, these are some of the assessments that you were asked to complete prior to today. Now, I am not going to be that professor and being like, how many of y'all did? Because I don't like when people ask me that question. Ain't none of your business whether I did it or not. I'm grown, okay? So what I will say is that this is an assessment tool that I would recommend that you complete individually and collectively, that you do it within your departments, or that you do it within your institution. Do it in a way that you all are not only assessing your own things, but you are also holding each other accountable, okay? This is another subset, which is advancing institutionalized equity. The first one was policies and practices. So now, when you are going through these different assessments, you are able to look individually and collectively. What are the gaps in training or support? How do we review institutional policies and procedures and course designs to make sure that we set our students or our workers or whoever up for success, whatever we define as success? Okay, so the first part was assess. The second one is assemble. Take inventory, which is how that assessment helps. What is already present, what is missing, what needs to stay, and what needs to go. Now, I may be of a small opinion in this. I do not believe that everything needs to fall under inclusion. And here's what I mean. If someone says to me something that is oppressive to me as a woman, as a Black person, as a mother, I don't feel that that needs to be included. I could give two blanks what you feel about that. I don't believe that that type of language and experience falls under inclusion. What I do believe is that as a community, we ask people to show up and be present with the understanding that if we are people who believe in freedom, if we are people who believe in equity, if we are people that believe in including the systematic and the systemic and the historical and societal gaps for persons because of their race, their gender, their socioeconomic class, their culture, their language, then these things can be present, and these things, they got to go. And so that takes a sustained effort in thinking about what ingredients, materials, or elements are needed to create and curate a heart set and mindset of equity and inclusion. This is on the website. What areas, meaning those 5 strengths, they represent your strengths. What areas represent learning opportunities? Do we have different, hold on one minute. Do we have different points of view? What are our priorities moving forward? And so the usually most effective ways of knowing how to move forward is knowing where you are and knowing where you have been, okay? All right, so 3 is the alignment. It's not about just leading with your heart or not just about leading with your mind. It's about leading with the both, okay? Both are valued in this work. Now, I want to quickly go through some quotes from Bell Hooks, who transitioned in 2021. She's the author of Teaching to Transgress and Teaching Community. Now, I'm just going to raise this quote. I have more quotes, which I actually will give this presentation to Kaisha and Melissa, and you all can read on your own. And if you want to email me, be like, what do you think about this? I'd be happy to tell you. Here is one quote. If we examine critically the traditional role of the university in the pursuit of truth and the sharing of knowledge and information, it is painfully clear that biases that uphold and maintain white supremacy, imperialism, sexism, and racism have distorted education so that it is no longer about the practice of freedom. The call for recognition of cultural diversity, our thinking of ways of knowing, a deconstruction of old epistemologies, and the concomitant demand that there be a transformation in our classrooms. I would also add boardrooms, meeting rooms, retreats, what have you, and how we teach. And I don't mean just teaching as an education, but what we instruct, what we model. This has been a necessary revolution, one that seeks to restore life to a corrupt and dying academy. As I said in the beginning, the old ways, the old guard of doing things is not working. We need to be more than just aesthetically allegiant. We need to be all in our hearts, our minds, our words, and our deeds. Now, the first way of alignment, I will tell you this story, is by changing your mind, by working to make sure that as you are renewing your mind, you are transforming educational institutions so that the way we teach and work, according to bell hooks, can reflect our joy in cultural diversity, our passion for justice, and our love for freedom. Oh, I skipped one. Change your heart by creating community. How are you creating community within your institution? Let me tell you something about alignment. I have a good friend of mine, and she was telling me the other day that she bought just this fabulous mattress. And this fabulous mattress, she couldn't wait to jump into and sleep forever. She dumped into the mattress. She tried to go to sleep. She kept tossing and turning, and she was trying to figure out why not only could she not go to sleep in this fabulous mattress, but why she was having pain in her body. And so after several nights, she went to her chiropractor, and her chiropractor said that it is not the mattress, it is you. And she said, what do you mean? I got this fabulous mattress and all of the commercials, all of the promotion says that it's fabulous. And the chiropractor says that is true. But the reason why you cannot enjoy this particular mattress is because you're so used to the raggedy mattresses. And as a result, your body is out of alignment. And so what she had to do with her chiropractor is engage in the process of alignment, which she says that alignment is painful, but necessary. And what I'm saying to you is that if we are engaging in the work of DEI and aligning our policies and procedures with what we believe our work is and how we can be equitable and inclusive, some of this alignment is going to be painful, but it's going to be necessary. Because we may be used to a particular type of formation, not even realizing that that formation is deaf dealing. Not literally per se, but maybe deaf dealing in terms of what we believe the outcome and the successes of those that we work with, that we might actually be setting them up for failure. So alignment is not going to be automatic, okay? The third type of alignment is to release control. You are an authority, but you are not the only authority, okay? So think highly of yourselves, and at the same time, understand that when it comes to particular types of diversity, in this example, cultural diversity, think about the fact that sometimes you are just one authority. Everyone who lives life on this earth, they are an authority of their lived experience. And sometimes having these necessary conversations is recognizing that we can have more than one voice at the table. Okay. In the question and answer period, I will talk about affirmative action and what I believe is going to be a ban on affirmative action. And the reason why that affects us is we need to consider, how do we rectify the equity gap by no longer relying on affirmative action? Because at the end of June, the Supreme Court, if I were a soothsayer or a predictor, I would say that based on the verbal and the oral arguments, affirmative action is going to be gone, and it's going to affect higher education, it's going to affect the workforce, it's going to affect a lot of us. So just know that I am considering that as well, okay? My timer says 2 seconds. I'm going to take 2 more minutes to address something, and then I am going to hush. Strategies. Most of us do not learn well in environments of shame and guilt. Most of us do not learn well or unlearn without the feeling of safety, without the feeling of bravery. And so instead of using a SMART goal, which is what most of us have used, I propose using a goal of ease, education, which is acknowledging that everyone is educated about something. So when you're having a conversation about equity, it is including the president of the university and also the woman who has been working 35 years in the cafeteria. I promise you, she knows more about the students than maybe the dean of students, because she talks to everyone. So it's acknowledging that the data is not only the numbers, it's in the stories and in the people. Accessibility. For your goal of ease, what are your access points? How do you enter into this conversation? And how do you make this accessible for all? Sustainability. Some goals that you may create may outlive you. You do not have to be personally alive in order to invest in a goal that may not be reached with your pretty lives, your handsome lives, your wonderful lives on this earth. So when we talk about legacy and succession, if we put some goals in place, can you be okay with knowing that you may not see all of the outcomes, either because you have transitioned on or because you have gone to another institution? And then consider the environment. Create the brave and the safe spaces, understanding that the ground is good soil, convincing people that this is a good place to sit and to rest and to have these conversations. Another strategy, culinary community conversations. I love to eat, and I assure you that most people do too. So sometimes have these conversations and planning and practices over a meal. You can even make it a community service project. Buy a meal, bring a meal, okay? So you are still addressing equity. You may be addressing the food deserts in particular communities. You may be addressing what does it look like to have equity in all things, okay? And then create or use an image in your particular groups that remind people of the goal. So when they see it, they know that's what you're talking about. If we see a McDonald's sign, the arches, if we see I don't know, a blue bird, we know that's Twitter. So what image can you realign that you could bring your coworkers, your communities back to knowing when they see this, they know that you are in alignment with your mission, your vision, and your goal. And then lastly, I have named 4 books, 5 books, but these 2 books, if I were to give you a Amazon card, not to endorse Amazon per se, but if I were to tell you, get you some books, there would be 2 things I would tell you to get. This book right here, which is called Rest is Resistance, which talks about how if you are doing this work, rest needs to be your foundational tenet. There's no way you can continue to work in diversity, equity, inclusion, and you don't take time for you. It doesn't make sense to work in diversity, equity, and inclusion, and at the same time, continue to engage in capitalism, in grinding, and keep working through things. Okay, so that's the first book. The second book, I'm Not Yelling, is a narrative from a Black woman that talks about how she navigated the workplace, about some things where she had to step back from, about the ways in which she had to educate people, how she had to unlearn some things. These are 2 books that if you were like, look, I need something to get my hands on, these are those 2 things, okay? And then lastly, if I have not offended you, if you still want to work with me after today, this is my company, Legalese Please, where we engage in decoding, deconstructing, and mystifying legal language. So we build you up by breaking it down. Barriers, comprehension, accessibility. We get rid of all those things so that you have an actual person, legal person, telling you when they say this, they really mean this. And then I'm on all the socials. That's my email. That's my website. And that is my time.